I can still remember that night, though I've tried to forget it. The things I saw, the things I heard. It haunts me, creeping into my dreams and twisting them into nightmares. It began in October, on one of those nights when the air turns cold, and the world seems to grow quieter, like it's holding its breath. I was driving home late from a friend's place, and to save time, I decided to take a back road that cut through the old woods. The road was barely more than a path, winding between towering trees that arched overhead, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The moon hung low, casting an eerie, silvery glow over everything. I'd driven this road once or twice, but that night, it felt different, darker, as if the shadows were deeper and the trees were watching. I hadn't been driving for long when I saw a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a woman, her pale face catching the moonlight as she waved me down. Her clothes were old-fashioned, like something out of the early 1900s, a long, tattered dress with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was tangled, hanging down her shoulders like a dark veil, and her eyes, those eyes were hollow, wide, and terrified. Against my better judgment, I slowed down, rolling down my window just enough to call out, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't respond, just stared at me with those vacant eyes. Then, slowly, she lifted a shaking hand and pointed into the woods, into the darkness. I felt a chill crawl down my spine, but something in her eyes held me there. It was as if she was pleading with me, begging me to understand something she couldn't say. "Do you need me to call someone?" I asked, but she shook her head violently, her hand still pointing. I followed her gaze, squinting into the trees, but saw only shadows shifting between the trunks. When I looked back, she was gone, just gone. The road was empty, as if she'd never been there at all. I sat there, heart pounding, debating whether to keep driving or to turn around. Something told me to leave, to go back the way I'd come, but my curiosity won out. I stepped out of the car, leaving the engine running, and followed the path she'd pointed to. The silence was thick, pressing down on me like a weight. Every step felt wrong, as if the ground itself was protesting my presence. The shadows seemed to shift, moving just out of sight, and the deeper I went, the colder the air became. I'd only gone a few hundred feet when I stumbled upon something that made me stop dead in my tracks. It was an old, crumbling house, half hidden by the trees and overgrown with vines. The wood was rotting, the windows broken, but the door was slightly ajar, as if someone had been here recently. I don't know what possessed me to go inside, but I did, pushing open the door with a creak that echoed through the silence. The inside was dark, with only the faint light from the moon filtering through the broken windows. The air was thick with the scent of mold and something else, something metallic. Blood. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to move forward, drawn by some unexplainable force. The floor was covered in a thin layer of dust, but I could make out footprints leading deeper into the house. They were small, delicate, like a woman's. I followed them down a narrow hallway, past rooms filled with broken furniture and strange symbols scrawled on the walls in what looked like ash or charcoal. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, like the rustle of leaves, but softer, more insidious. I froze, straining to hear, and the voice came again, clearer this time, a woman's voice, low and mournful. "Help me?" The sound seemed to be coming from a door at the end of the hallway, a door that looked newer than the rest of the house, as if it had been added more recently. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to leave, but something compelled me to keep going. I reached the door and hesitated before slowly pushing it open. The room beyond was small and dark, the air stale and suffocating, and in the center of the room was a single chair, facing the wall. A woman was sitting in it, her back to me, her shoulders slumped as if she'd been sitting there for a very long time. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely audible. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge me, but I felt her presence, heavy and oppressive, filling the room. I took a step closer, and that's when I saw it. The floor around her was stained dark, a deep, almost black shade that looked disturbingly like dried blood. A chill ran through me, but I forced myself to take another step, reaching out to touch her shoulder. But just as my hand was about to make contact, she moved. Her head snapped around, her eyes wide and glassy, her mouth twisted in a silent scream. Her face was pale, her skin stretched tight over her bones, and her eyes, they were hollow, empty, like the eyes of a corpse. I stumbled back, heart racing, but she didn't move. She just stared at me, her mouth open in that silent, unnatural scream. And then she whispered, "You shouldn't have come here." Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind me, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, the dim light barely enough to see by, and when I looked up, she was gone. The chair was empty, the room silent, but I could feel something in the air, a presence watching me, closing in. I turned to the door, desperate to leave, but it wouldn't budge. I pounded on it, shouting for help, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. And then, slowly, I heard footsteps, soft, shuffling footsteps, coming closer, as if someone was walking down the hallway toward me. The footsteps stopped just outside the door, and I could hear breathing, shallow and ragged, like someone gasping for air. My heart pounded as I backed away, pressing myself against the wall, but there was nowhere to go. The door creaked open, and in the faint light of my phone, I saw her standing there, her face twisted into a look of pure malice. Her eyes locked onto mine, and she smiled, a slow, cruel smile that sent a wave of terror through me. "You belong here now," she whispered, her voice echoing in the darkness, "just like the others." I ran past her, shoving her out of the way, and sprinted down the hallway, my footsteps echoing as I raced toward the front door. But no matter how far I ran, the hallway stretched on and on, the house seeming to twist and shift around me, trapping me within its walls. Finally, I burst through the front door and stumbled into the night, gasping for air. The house loomed behind me, silent and dark, as if it were watching me, waiting for me to come back. I ran to my car, jumped in, and drove away, not daring to look back. When I finally reached home, I locked every door and window, but it didn't matter. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard her voice again, whispering in the darkness, "You belong to me now." And every night since, I've heard her, that same whisper, growing louder and closer, as if she's standing right outside my door, waiting for the moment when I'll finally let her in. There's something about the house at the end of Old Willow Road that's never sat right with anyone in town. Though abandoned as long as I can remember, sometimes on the darkest nights, a light flickers in one of the windows, just for a moment, before the house is swallowed by shadow again. It's the kind of place that makes your skin crawl if you even glance at it for too long, like it's watching you right back. I never had a reason to go near it, but one October night, I found myself walking down Old Willow Road after my car broke down a few miles back. With no cell service to call for help, I had to hike to the nearest gas station. The cold was sinking into my bones, and a thick mist began curling through the trees, blurring the path ahead. It was nearly midnight when I heard the footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, keeping pace with mine no matter how fast or slow I walked. Turning around, I expected to see someone, but I was alone. I quickened my pace, my breath puffing like smoke, but the footsteps kept following, just far enough behind to remain hidden. Then I saw it, the house, looming at the end of the road, its windows dark and hollow, like empty eyes watching me. Something urged me closer. The air felt thick, pulling me in, as though the house was calling me. I knew I should keep walking, but I couldn't help myself. I reached the rusty gate, my heart pounding as I stared at the silent, oppressive structure. Without realizing it, I found myself opening the gate, each creak loud in the night air. The mist thickened, curling around the house, and I could barely see ahead. The front porch steps groaned under my weight, a chill running down my spine as I stepped inside. The door closed softly behind me, though I hadn't touched it. The hallway, lined with faded wallpaper, was filled with broken furniture and shadows that seemed to dance when I wasn't looking, and the air was stale, filled with the smell of mold, dust, and something faintly metallic and rotten. My steps echoed in the silence as I moved deeper into the house. Then I heard the whispering, soft at first, then louder, coming from every direction. "Turn back," the voices murmured, overlapping in a haunting chorus. Trying to brush it off as the wind, I moved down the hallway, glancing into rooms filled with broken furniture and shadows. But at the end of the hallway was a door that seemed different, new, untouched by time. Its handle shone, polished and inviting. I don't know why, but I opened it and found a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The whispers grew louder as I moved down, and I could feel something waiting below, watching. My instincts screamed to turn back, but I kept going. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a dimly lit room, its walls covered in strange symbols drawn in a dark, sticky substance that looked unsettlingly like dried blood. In the center was a single chair, facing the wall, and a figure slumped in it. Moving closer, I could smell decay, my stomach twisting as I reached out. But just before I touched it, the figure turned around. His face was not human, not anymore. Skin stretched tight over a skull-like face, hollow eyes that seemed to pull me in, and a twisted, unnatural grin. Then it spoke, in a low, rasping whisper, "You're finally here." I stumbled back as the figure stood, its movements jerky, reaching out with bony fingers. I turned and ran, the footsteps dragging behind me. The whispers grew louder as I fled up the stairs. "You can't leave, you belong to us now." I threw open the front door and stumbled out into the mist. Only when I reached the road did I turn back. The house was dark, silent, but in the window, I saw a shadowy figure watching, its hollow eyes glinting in the moonlight. I didn't wait to see if it would follow. I ran, and even now, weeks later, I still hear the whispers sometimes, faint and far away. "You can't escape, we'll find you." And in the dead of night, when I close my eyes, I see that face again, grinning from the darkness, waiting. I had been watching her house for weeks. At first, it was just curiosity, a strange and subtle pull toward the old Victorian mansion on the hill, shrouded in ivy with cracked windows and a slanted roof, which had stood empty for as long as I could remember. But one day, a light appeared in the window, confirming the rumors that someone lived there. I took to driving by late at night, captivated by the faint light flickering in the windows and the silhouette of a woman, standing for hours without a phone or book, just watching, sometimes giving me the eerie feeling she was watching me too. Curiosity overtook common sense one midnight, and I knocked on her door. She opened it without a word, as though she'd been expecting me. The air inside was heavy with a damp, stale scent as she led me through candlelit hallways, shadows dancing on the walls. "My name is Alara," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She was pale, her large dark eyes seeming to peer straight through me. She offered me tea that tasted of wildflowers and bitterness, watching intently as I drank, unblinking. When she asked what brought me there, I muttered something about curiosity. She seemed amused, as though she saw right through my excuse. Smiling slowly, she asked, "Would you like to see the rest of the house?" I nodded, unable to refuse. She led me down a narrow staircase into an older, darker part of the house, past portraits with hollow eyes that seemed to follow me. At the end of a hallway, she unlocked a heavy door with a rusted key. Inside was a small, dark room lined with old dolls, each unique but all bearing expressions of fear. "Do you like them?" she asked, her voice almost gleeful. "They're my collection." A chill crept over me. "Where did you get them?" I managed to whisper. Her eyes glinted with something dark. "Oh, they come to me, just like you." She shut the door, leaving us in darkness. I groped for the handle, but there was only solid wall where the door had been. "Elara!" I shouted, but she was silent. My body felt leaden, paralyzed by the oppressive dark. Then I heard faint whispers that grew louder, a chorus of desperate, fearful voices coming from the dolls. Shadows formed around me, hollow eyes and twisted limbs reaching toward me. "Help us! Save us!" they whispered, their icy touch pressing in on me. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. Just before I passed out, I saw Elara's face, watching with satisfaction as though her collection was now complete. I woke hours later, lying on the grass outside the mansion, which was dark and silent as if no one had ever lived there. I staggered home, locking every door and window, but I started seeing them, the dolls, watching from the corners of my room with those hollow, fearful eyes. Then one night I looked in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes large and dark, almost too large, and the same expression of fear stared back at me. The same look I had seen on all those dolls. Growing up, my parents never wanted us in the basement, saying it was just for storage and that there was nothing interesting down there. I believed them, but the basement always felt wrong. Even when I was alone in the house, the air around the basement door felt heavy, and sometimes I thought I heard faint noises from below. When my parents passed away, the house was left to me. It was painful to clean everything out, but I had no choice. I had to sell it. I avoided the basement, saving it for last. But as I cleared the upstairs rooms, I started hearing it again. Faint, soft noises from below. I couldn't ignore it any longer. One day, I mustered the courage to go down there. The basement door creaked open, revealing steep steps leading into darkness. The light switch didn't work, so I grabbed a flashlight and stepped inside. The beam barely penetrated the thick shadows, making the room feel even smaller and more claustrophobic. As I descended, the air grew colder, carrying a damp, musty smell that made me wrinkle my nose. I scanned the room, shining the light across boxes, old furniture, and shelves lined with dusty jars and tools. Nothing explained the strange noises. Then, as I was about to head back up, I noticed a door at the far end of the basement that I'd never seen before. It was small, almost like a closet, with chipped paint and a rusty handle. I could have sworn it hadn't been there when I was a kid. Curiosity got the better of me, and I reached for the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passage leading further down. A second basement, hidden beneath the first. I felt my stomach twist, but I couldn't turn back now. I stepped into the passage, feeling the temperature drop even more. The walls were lined with rough stone, and the floor was covered in dust that muffled my footsteps. At the bottom, I found myself in a small, dark room. The only sound was my breathing and a faint echo of dripping water nearby. I shone the flashlight around, revealing strange markings etched into the walls, symbols and shapes I didn't recognize. A feeling of dread settled over me, my heart pounding. That's when I saw it. A figure in the corner of the room, huddled and still. At first, I thought it was a mannequin or statue, something my parents had stored. But as I moved closer, the figure shifted, its head turning slowly to face me. My heart stopped. It was a woman, pale and gaunt, her eyes dark and hollow, wearing a torn, dirty dress with tangled, matted hair. Her lips parted slightly as if to speak, but no sound came. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight, every instinct in my body screaming to run. But I was frozen, caught in her empty gaze. Then she stood up, moving slowly, unnaturally, like she hadn't moved in years, stepping toward me silently. I backed up, heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. Who are you?" I managed to whisper. She didn't answer, just kept coming closer, her eyes fixed on mine. I felt the wall press against my back. There was nowhere to go. She reached out a hand, skeletal fingers hovering inches from my face, cold radiating from her, seeping into my skin, making my whole body feel numb. "Please," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Please, let me go." Her face twisted, her mouth opening wider, revealing broken, stained teeth. She leaned closer, her breath cold and foul. In a voice that sounded like it hadn't been used in decades, she whispered, "Why did you come here?" I couldn't answer. I wanted to tell her I was sorry, that I didn't mean to disturb her, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was stare, paralyzed. She took another step back, her eyes narrowing as if trying to understand me. Then, slowly, she pointed toward the far corner of the room, where the shadows were thickest. "Look," she rasped, her voice echoing. I didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but something compelled me to look. In the corner, partially hidden beneath debris, was a rusted metal box. I hesitated, glancing back at her, but she just stood there, watching. With trembling hands, I pulled the box out. It was old, corroded and covered in dirt. I took a deep breath and opened it. Inside was a stack of old, yellowed papers, covered in symbols I'd seen on the walls, along with a faded photograph of a young woman who looked just like her. I looked up, heart sinking as I realized the truth. She was trapped here, bound to this place, unable to leave. By finding her, by opening that door, I had unleashed her anger, her pain, her endless longing to be free. Guilt surged through me, but it was too late. The woman's eyes glinted darkly as she stepped closer, her cold hand resting on my shoulder. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, bitterness chilling me to the bone. "Now you're trapped too." The last thing I remember was her face, inches from mine, her eyes filling my vision until there was nothing else. No light, no sound, just her empty gaze. I woke up on the basement floor, alone, the flashlight flickering beside me. The hidden room door was gone, sealed as if it had never existed. I stumbled upstairs, dazed, shaken. I couldn't stay there another night. I sold the place as quickly as I could, warning the new owners to stay away from the basement. But sometimes, even now, I wake up in the middle of the night, feeling that same cold presence lingering in the darkness. And sometimes, if I'm very still, I can still hear her voice, whispering from somewhere deep below. "Why did you come here?" That was the last time I ever saw my sister alive. We grew up in a small town nestled between dense woods and rolling hills, and the forest was our playground. My sister, Lila, was fearless, always leading me into the dark parts where the trees grew thick enough to block out the sky. But one autumn, when she was 15, everything changed. It started with the voices. Lila spoke of strange whispers she heard in the forest, and she'd grab my hand, pulling me deeper, saying, "They're calling me." Her obsession grew as she visited the woods daily, staying out until dark, her grades slipping, her friends drifting away. She'd only say, "They understand me." Then one cold October evening, she disappeared. My parents were frantic, and the town searched the woods, but found nothing. Weeks passed, and I went into the forest each evening, calling her name, hoping for an answer. Late one November evening, I finally heard it, a faint voice calling my name. I followed it deeper into the woods, reaching a twisted grove surrounding an old, crumbling well. The air was icy, a stench of decay hung around it, and something ancient and angry seemed to hide in the shadows. But the voice called from the well. Peering into its darkness, I saw a pale figure reaching up. It was Lila, skeletal and hollow-eyed, but as she looked up, her face twisted into a grin that wasn't hers. "It's so lonely down here," she said in a distorted voice. "Come join me." Terror took over, and I ran, with her mocking laughter echoing around me, blending with the sounds of crying voices. I tried to tell my parents, but no one believed me. They said I was traumatized, told me to move on. But I couldn't. I went back to the forest, always hearing the voices, beckoning me closer to the well. Then, one night, she appeared in my room, her eyes hollow, whispering, "Why did you leave me? Come back to the well." I tried to ignore it, but the voices grew stronger, calling me. Years have passed, but I still hear her sometimes, especially in the quiet moments. She's waiting for me, wanting me back at the well, and I find myself at the forest's edge, staring into the trees, feeling that pull. Come back! It's harder to resist each time. One day I'll go back, and when I do, I know I won't be coming back.